Good morning, everybody. Corey U's Bloody History. So, today we're going to continue on with John Armstrong's work on Lee Harvey Oswald's time in the Marines. And so, I've kind of concluded that these articles he had written are really excerpts from his book, broken down into like easily digestible form. His book is 1,000 pages. It's daunting even for me. But one thing I want to do first is I want to go over... I spent the last... Jesus Christ. I couldn't even tell you how many fucking hours. I probably got 20 hours in this, what I've done so far. But I spent a lot of time going over every single one of Lee Harvey Oswald's and Marguerite Oswald's alleged addresses, going back to the time Oswald was born until after the assassination. Or did I go that far? No, I got up through November of 61. So some really interesting shit going on here when you look at their family situation and you look at the places they lived and you look at the financial situation, particularly of Marguerite Oswald, who was always broke, right? And I believe we read the testimony of Ed Pick's father, what was it, John Edward Pick. And he said he gave her, from the time that they were divorced, he gave her $40 a month for like 20 fucking years, right? So rent back then was like $20, right? So no matter what, they should have always had rent money because she was getting $40 a month from John Pick. Or from Ed Pick. Why the fuck would you name your kid the same name but just switch two of the names? It's just ridiculous. There's nothing about this family seems right. But let me get into these addresses because you'll start to see some major shenanigans here surrounding a woman who was allegedly always fucking broke, right? So it appears that they, Ed Pick and Marguerite lived at numerous addresses on Alvar Street until they actually bought a house. They bought the first house, 2109 Alvar. What year did they buy that? They bought it before Oswald was born. Okay. And that was a house that they had lived at initially. As per Robert Oswald, because I've been trying to cross-reference all these addresses with Robert Oswald's book, Lee, A Portrait of Lee Harvey Oswald, which is, you can tell he didn't write that book because there is outright propaganda in that book. Every chance he gets, he throws Lee under the bus by quoting someone who said that Lee had a violent temper or Lee wanted to shoot somebody, or it was very much built up to make Lee feel like a person who was angry and could do something like this his whole life, right? Then he starts talking about how Lee liked that show, I Led Three Lives, which is like a spy show. But like Robert Oswald's the only person in the world who will testify to that. Like nobody else, that doesn't come from anywhere else, right? Lee never mentioned it his whole fucking life. So we can't believe Robert Oswald at all. He was in on this scheme. Ultimately, the point of this is trying to figure out if there were multiple Lee Harvey Oswalds with multiple Marguerite Oswalds as the caretaker. And while Armstrong has made some mistakes, I have caught some things that I need to investigate further. Times that he said Lee was doing something in the Marines, but then the person who was with Lee is one of the people who's associated with supposedly Harvey, right? So, like in Max 9, right? In Santa Ana, California, there was a guy named Cassisi, right? And Armstrong is convinced Cassisi was with Lee, but Cassisi was with the one at the Lighter Than Air Squadron, right? And so that was Harvey. So I found a couple incidents where it seems that Armstrong can't really determine who was where, right? But am I convinced that there was some kind of shenanigans, some kind of duplicate person going on? Absolutely. And the proof of that is the Stripling Beauregard situation in the fall of 1954, right? So starting in September 1954. That's just one of probably half a dozen incidents that I have been able to determine so far that Armstrong got right. When you look at these addresses and you kind of get a feeling for the backstory, And you understand that they're supposed to be broke this whole time and struggling, and she wanted to give up her kids to the orphanage because she never had any fucking money. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I don't at all. There was one witness who said that I have his statement here from the commission's exhibits, the Warren Commission. It was someone who knew Marguerite back in the 30s when she was with Ed Pick. And he said that she cheated on Ed Pick, and he even named the guy that she cheated with. So she might have just been a fucking whore. You never know. She might have just been doing this to fucking get the kids out of the house because she didn't want kids because she was a real cunt. And that's exactly how it seems. Everybody who knew this woman seemed to say that she was nice as long as she got her way. You know, so this is not a nice woman who doesn't really care about her kids. That's a goddamn given. Like, you can tell she doesn't give a fuck about her kids from the fact she's trying to give them away to the orphanage multiple times, and then she finally gets rid of all three of them for a time. So, God, I hope we can get to the Marine stuff, because I'm going to cover this address stuff first. Maybe we'll just put the Marine stuff off till tomorrow. But so the first house is the Alvar Street address, but then she goes to a guy named Mancuso, and she knew him, and she's like, oh, I can't afford this place. Can you please rent it from me? And then she went out and rented a house at 1242 Congress, and this is in September of 1940. Note, she still owns this house at Alvar while she's living at Congress Street. So she has a rental property. Then, on March 5th, 1941, she buys another property at 1010 Bartholomew. This is all in the FBI documents. This is confirmed. This is not... None of these addresses are bullshit. This is all these addresses, all 39 of them are 100% legitimate, confirmed by the FBI, or are documented somewhere. Armstrong found a bunch of these addresses in the Marine stuff. The Marines has a bunch of addresses for Oswald. He kept updating his address, which is fucking strange. But let me get back to this. So 831 Pauline, and she's there with Lee only because Robert and Ed Pick, or John Pick, are in the orphanage. All right. So note, at this point in time, she's living at 831 Pauline, and she still owns the Alvar property, and she still owns the Bartholomew property. Do I have a date on when she sold the Bartholomew? I have a date when she sold the Alvar Street address. She didn't sell that till January 21st, 1944. So she had a rental property income all the way through January 21st, 1944. And actually, she had a second rental property income at 1010 Bartholomew, which I don't know the date she sold that. But I believe she might have sold that when she bought the next house, which I believe was at San Saba, which we'll get to that. Which is only 3 years later and 10 addresses later. Okay, so 831 Pauline, she's living there with Lee only, January of 1942. Well, remember, she simultaneously has two rental properties at this time, and she's complaining that she's broke. And she's getting $40 a month from Ed Pick, which she got until like the fucking late 50s. Till like Oswald was in the Marines is when she got that fucking money. So, and then what you have is after the Pauline address, you have Lee Harvey Oswald and his two brothers living at the Bethlehem home, which was an orphanage in New Orleans. And she moves into 2136 Broadway on August 17th. 1942. She'll then move into 227 Atlantic Avenue in Algiers, Louisiana on September 10th of 1942. We then have 4801 Victor in Dallas in early 1944. So it's early 1944, and she is just now getting around to selling the Alvar house, but she will take that money and she will buy the house at 101 San Saba, which we'll get to. But 4801 Victor in Dallas in early of 44. At around this time, 44 to 45, you have John Pick and Robert in military school in Mississippi, and they're there for about 3 years. Next, we have these numerous references to living in Benbrook. The only address is Granberg Road, Route 45, Benbrook. And this is confirmed by Robert in his book Lee, that they went from Benbrook. They went to Benbrook, okay? So this is where we start to run into some really significant problems here. So the Benbrook address was from fall of 45, as per Robert, fall of 45, through sometime in 1946, and they rented that place. Then we have documentation by the FBI. Well, hang on, before I get to that. The next known address for Marguerite and Lee, as per Robert Oswald, is 1505 8th Avenue. And according to Robert, they went directly from Benbrook, the Granberg Road address, to 1505 8th Avenue. I believe that's Fort Worth. So this is the first anomaly we have, and it goes back to 1946. Referenced in the FBI documents, which I didn't even see these. I didn't even see these referenced by Armstrong, honestly. This is, I have two addresses here. 600 West 24th Street in Covington, Louisiana, 1946, as per a woman named Mrs. Benny Comenge, Commenge, documented by the FBI. The next address I have is 311 Vermont Street, Covington, Louisiana, 1946, as per a woman named Mrs. Logan Magruder. And Mrs. Logan Magruder told the FBI that Marguerite Oswald lived here with her son for about a year, and that she had been sent to her by Mrs. Benny Comenge, meaning that she had moved into 600 West 24th Street in Covington in 1946, but it was too small of a place. And so she got referred to Mrs. Magruder, and then she moved into 311 Vermont Street in Covington in 1946. And she says she stayed there for about a year. However, we have Robert Oswald telling us that they went directly from the Benbrook address to the 1505 8th Avenue address. 12747 as per Robert. And my notes here are M and L went directly from Benbrook to here. So we have an issue. Now, at this point, she sold the Alvar Street property, but I believe she still owns 1010 Bartholomew. So at this point, broke-ass Marguerite, who sent two of her kids off to boarding school, is living at 1505 8th Avenue with a rental property income, with $40 a month from Ed Pick, and she has a job. Okay? So something's going on here. After this, Robert and his brother, John Pick, end up back in Fort Worth, and they're living in the first quarter of 1948 at 3300 Willing Street. Now, this is where Robert said that it felt like, because they were doing really well, because she had married Edward Ekdahl, and then Robert said that they felt like they were like upper class kids, because they had a big house and their own room and all that stuff. And then when they go to the Willing address, the 3300 Willing Street, Robert says that he felt like they were poor again. So this is after she is no longer living with Ekdahl, and they're back on their own at 3300 Willing Street, but they're only there for the first quarter. So the house was sold. Let me see the dates here. I believe the Bartholomew house, it ends up getting sold, and the proceedings with that go into purchasing the address at 101 San Saba, which I believe is also in Benbrook. I believe San Saba is also in Benbrook. She purchased it on 7/7/47, and here's the kicker. While she's still living with Ekdahl is when she bought this place. They move into this 1505 8th Avenue address at January 27th, 47. She buys the San Saba address on July 7th, 47, so 6 months later. While owning the San Saba address, they move into 3300 Willing, which sucked and was right next to the train tracks, and the trains kept everybody up because it was running all night. So, but she doesn't move into her San Saba address. She doesn't move into the San Saba address, actually only for 2 months, July and August of 1948. So she owns the property for a year before moving in there. Now, I run into a problem and I don't know where the solution lies. According to John Armstrong, a woman named Georgia Bell told the FBI certain facts about Marguerite Oswald that led him to believe that the imposter Marguerite was living at 101 San Saba the entire time that it was owned by the real Marguerite. And then after the imposter Marguerite moved out, then the real Marguerite and her kids moved in July and August of 1948. After those 2 months, she will rent the San Saba address to a man named Otis Carlton, who will then purchase the property from her on November 6, 1951. So what we have is Marguerite Oswald, who's a fucking landlady, who has multiple properties at a time. Remember, at certain times, she's owned 2 properties at a time. But she's constantly broke despite getting alimony and all that stuff, and shipping her kids off to boarding school. There's something going on with her where she needs all this money while her children are living in squander. So the next address I have for her is 7408 Ewing, purchased September in 1948. So this is after she moves out of the 3300 Willing address. Oh, hang on a second. Am I missing something here? So she lived here in the first quarter of 1948. And then I don't seem to have an address for her. I seem to not have an address for the woman living at 3300 Willing after she moved out of the Willing address. Unless she went directly to 7408 Ewing, but I don't see how that would be possible. Well, I have to research this couple month gap here where she went directly from Willing Street, because she went from Willing somewhere and then to San Saba is what I'm saying, because she was only there the beginning of 1948, unless she was there through June. But I don't have any other indications of any other addresses, so perhaps this is correct. 3300 Willing, where they were living by the railroad tracks, leaves there after the beginning of 48, goes to the San Saba address, then rents it to Otis Carlton, and heads to, and she doesn't get to, well, July, August, yeah, here we go. From San Saba, she will go to 7408 Ewing, purchased September of 48. She won't sell that property until August 20th of 1952. So she'll have that property for 4 years. Then we have additional records showing that she bought 4833 Birchman in Fort Worth, which is 8 blocks from Stripling Junior High School, which we've talked about Stripling Junior High School. This property is right near it. And she bought this November 15th, 1951. So, and just let me reiterate what I said earlier. The addresses in Covington, Louisiana, are a complete fucking mystery. We have witnesses who put her there. We have FBI documents that put her there. Yet we have Robert's statement that they went straight from Benbrook to 1505 8th Avenue. So we have some kind of overlap here. This is like a big overlap. We have another overlap here with these addresses around 4833 Birchman, because at the time she should still be living at 7408 Ewing. And that place isn't sold till August 20th of 52. So she goes from there to Birchman. But see, the Birchman address is not in the official story. The Birchman address is not in the record of the FBI. It's in property records that John Armstrong dug up. From there, the story is they went from the Ewing address up to New York. 325 East 92nd Avenue, that's John Pick's apartment. And they're there from July and August of 1952. They then rent a place in August of 52 at 1455 Sheridan Avenue in the Bronx. So here's where we get into some of the weird stuff with Lee's school records, because John Armstrong has documents of Lee Armstrong attending PS 44 in Manhattan, which is clearly in Manhattan off of like 79th Street, I believe it was. And in Robert Oswald's book, he confirmed that Lee started at, and the school had another name. It had a proper name, like a person's name. And Robert Oswald confirms that he went to that school in Manhattan. However, the official story says he only went to school in the Bronx at PS 44 in the Bronx and PS 117. But the reality is, according to Armstrong, while one of the Oswalds was in the Bronx going to PS 44, going to PS 44, which didn't work out for him. He was a truant. The other Oswald was going to PS 44 in Manhattan. And John Armstrong has the records of both. You see, here I'm at a point where I still am wanting to. There's something wrong with Armstrong's conclusion. I don't know what it is yet, but something is amiss. I believe there was this duplicate Oswald, but I don't know exactly what the story is. So the next address we have is 825 East 179th, and that's in the Bronx. That is where Oswald's going to PS 117. Now, here's another anomaly, another address anomaly. This is the third address anomaly so far. July and August of 1953. The fake Marguerite and the fake Oswald head to Stanley, North Dakota. Now, everybody in the world denies this. The FBI denies this. The official story denies this. But we have multiple statements from a guy named William Henry Timmer, who provided some amazing detail on Oswald. He was just a kid, and Oswald was an older kid. And he said Oswald showed up and said he was in a gang in New York and that he would get into fights and he would go to the Bronx Zoo. And he told him all this stuff that checks out, right? And then Timmer's mother also confirmed, yes, Oswald, she actually pointed out to Timmer, hey, didn't you know this guy? And he's like, yeah, I knew this guy. And then he goes to the FBI, and the FBI is like, yeah, you're full of shit. But in July of August of 1953, you have an Oswald in Stanley, North Dakota, at the same time that he is living at 825 East 179th in the Bronx. Okay, so that's your third address anomaly. After this, we get to 126 Exchange Place, which is an apartment. 126 Exchange Place is causing me some agita, because this is another address where it appears that, based on the dates at hand, both of these Oswald children lived there at different times, which I still have a hard time wrapping my brain around. The contradiction of people surrounding them who wouldn't know the difference. Give me a break. It's ridiculous at times. But this address anomaly I can't figure out. So Armstrong claims that, well, allegedly from Robert Oswald. Robert Oswald says that Lee and his mother moved from New York and they go right to Exchange Place. That's what he says. So this is January 1954. Allegedly, Lee and his mother are living at 126 Exchange Place. Armstrong claims that the false Marguerite Oswald, after leaving Stanley, North Dakota in August of 53, will move into 126 Exchange Place, because this is the address that is on Harvey Oswald's school paperwork at Beauregard. 126 Exchange Place. Jim, can you verify that for me, please? Can you verify the overlap with 126 Exchange Place and when they were supposed to move in, and whether or not Oswald's school records document that? Because that's what Armstrong says. Armstrong says that was the school on the paperwork for that semester, for that fall semester. But you have Oswald still in New York City, attending PS 44 in Manhattan. So January 54 rolls around, and the Oswald imposter and his mother will then seemingly disappear until the fall semester of 1954, where they show up at 2220 Thomas Place. But all the while, after Oswald's living at 126 Exchange Place until May of 54. And that's when Oswald and his mother move into 1454 St. Mary Street in New Orleans. This is attested to by Myrtle Evans, the landlord, and said they were there until spring of 1955. So this 2220 Thomas Place in January of 1954. This is the overlap with Stripling, and this becomes our fourth address anomaly. We then have another. This is interesting, because after St. Mary's, there's also another notation of going back to 126 Exchange Place in New Orleans from November of 55 through August of 56. So then you can consider that an additional address anomaly. So it looks like they moved out of Exchange Place, went to St. Mary's, and then went back to Exchange Place as per the school records and the documents, unless they were just using that address and didn't live there, which is very unlikely. We would know. The reason that I say 126 Exchange Place, they were still living there, is because Gerard Toujeg, who employed Oswald, when he talked to Armstrong. Okay, so when you go through the Warren Commission and the FBI documents, Toujeg tells them that Oswald only worked for him for 2 months. But when Armstrong went and interviewed everybody at Toujeg's, because Toujeg was dead, but he went and interviewed everybody else, they're like, no, Oswald was there for like a year and a half. And he was there up until he left for the Marines. And so Armstrong puts... And he has an address of 126 Exchange Place on the records there. So unless Oswald just failed to update his information, but I don't think so, because 126 Exchange Place was right down the road from Toujeg's. So from there, I have that in November 55 to August of 56. And the next address I have is controversial, because this is what Armstrong says is the proof that Robert Oswald was in on this scheme from the beginning. And this is the address at 4936 Collinwood. And allegedly, this address was occupied from July 1st of 56 to June 1st of 57. Well, June 1st, 57 by Marguerite, because Ali has already gone to the Marines in October of 56. So the controversy over the Collinwood address is that Robert Oswald lived there. And we know that because he opened a bank account and he used that address. However, this is an address linked to the imposter Marguerite and imposter Lee Oswald. So Robert's presence there is weird. But then when you go through Robert's book, you can tell he's running cover the entire time for the CIA or whoever did this, because he's just you guys have to. It's on archive.org. It's free. Maybe if I can find the link again, I'll put it in here. But you got to read it, because you'll see. And the way he writes, and it was beyond him. I mean, the guy wasn't that bright, and he ended up writing this book about his brother, and it just throws him under the bus in so many ways. But this address, having Robert live there with the imposter, is odd to me. Next address is we have. This address isn't supposed to exist. It's not in the official record, but we know it was there. 1031 West 5th in Fort Worth, as per Mrs. James Taylor. Mrs. James Taylor, they always used the husband's name back in the 60s in documents. So Mrs. James Taylor was the landlord at 4936 Collinwood. And after Marguerite moved out of here in July of 57, or in June of 57, She moved into this 1031 West 5th address in Fort Worth, and she owed bills at Collinwood. And so Mrs. James Taylor, who was the landlady, repeatedly drove to 1031 West 5th to try to collect her money. So we have absolute rock solid proof that Marguerite was living there. We have another address which contradicts this as well, and contradicts 126 Exchange Place, and contradicts 4936 Collinwood. And that's 3830 West 6th Street in Fort Worth, which allegedly the move-in date was August 1st of 1956, which actually that would coincide with the moving out of Exchange Place after the Marine. So from Exchange Place to 3830 West 6th makes sense. But then you have a duplicate address here, two duplicate addresses, 4936 Collinwood and 1031 West 5th. Both we know are legitimate through documents in the Warren Commission, right? The check stub from Robert Oswald proving the Collinwood address. And then we have the statements from Mrs. James Taylor proving the 1031 West 5th Fort Worth address. Simultaneously, we have Marguerite Oswald living at 3830 West 6th in Fort Worth as of August 1st, 1956, which contradicts all those addresses. And we know that that address is valid because Lee mailed a postcard to her to that address in 1957, and it is in the Fort Worth directory in 1958 for Marguerite Oswald. Now, after that, so this is Armstrong's take that the 1031 address was the fake Marguerite and 3830 was the legit Marguerite. That's Armstrong's take. So according to Armstrong, after 1031 West 5th, we have in June, what year is this? This is July of 57. And then she moves out of there into August 1st of 56. And then from there we have Palmer McBride, who sees her at Hotel Senator with Lee when he's working at the Pfister Dental Lab, right? So we'll talk about the Palmer McBride stuff in depth at some point. But Palmer McBride is a witness to Oswald having been in New Orleans at a time when he's supposed to be in Atsugi, Japan. And I've spent the last couple of days going over all of these fucking documents, and I can't believe I'm going to say this, but it appears Armstrong got it right. It appears that Armstrong got it right. And that Lee Oswald, after some training and going to school and stuff, was sent back to New Orleans for a time before going back to the Marines and going to Japan. It's strange, but we'll cover that once we get to the Marine section, which we'll probably do tomorrow. So Palmer McBride sees the fake Oswald and the fake Marguerite living at Hotel Senator. The next address we have, starting July 29th, 1958, is at 3006 Bristol Road. And this is on Lee Harvey Oswald's 1958 tax return. And allegedly, that address went from July 29th, 58 to February of 59. The Bristol Road address, I don't think, is even considered part of the official story, but it just happens to show up in official documents. Then, at the exact same time, we have Marguerite moving into 313 Templeton Drive, Fort Worth, as per a woman named Melba Childs. And this is, let me see, so Bristol was until the end of February of 59. And then from February 59, she's at 313 Templeton Drive. And then in June of 59, she moves into 3124 West 5th Street in Fort Worth. And she's there from June 59 to October 59. Then we have an address in October of 59 of 1013 West 5th Avenue, right up the road. And yet, on October 31st, she talked to a reporter about Lee's defection, and she gave an address of 3616 Harley. That's not an existing address. That's not a real address. Then Oswald had a letter forwarded from 3006 Bristol, which they moved out of there in February of 59. A letter to him was sent there and then forwarded to him at 1605 8th Avenue. And this is January 1960. So just between 1950, let's go to 1958. So the addresses attributed to Marguerite Oswald in a 2-year period are 3830 West 6th, Hotel Senator, 3006 Bristol, 313 Temple Drive, 3124 West 5th Street, and then 1013 West 5th Avenue. And then 1605 8th Avenue brings us to January 1960. In 2 years, she had like 8-9 addresses. This is not normal. Nobody does this. This is not usual. And with the contradiction and overlap in some of these addresses, you have to acknowledge that. You couldn't live in 3 places at one fucking time while owning 2 rental properties and being fucking broke. Right? Right? Am I crazy for thinking that? So Oswald had a letter forwarded and it arrived at 1605 8th Avenue, January 1960. By April of 1960, Marguerite Oswald's address is 1111 Herring Avenue in Waco, Texas. But she gave a reporter that same month, in April of 60, the address of 1410 Hurley in Fort Worth. As of July 1st, 1960, Marguerite is back at Fort Worth in 1407 8th Avenue. July 1st, 1960. And this is as per Herman Manthe. And according to John Armstrong, this is the original Marguerite. And as per John Armstrong, the original Marguerite, and I still need to dig into more of this stuff. The original Marguerite closed her bank account on October 14th, 1960. And moved to New Orleans. She would then be seen in New Orleans through 1962, working at numerous department stores in New Orleans. John Pick said he visited her in the fall of 1961 at Cox's department store. Think about this. The original Marguerite is out of the picture now, closed bank accounts from Fort Worth, moved to New Orleans, and she's still public as of 1962. There's a photograph of her of 1962, I believe, actually, now that I think about it. Oswald defected in 59, and the false Marguerite Oswald, who was seen all over television and causing such a stink about her son being a secret agent, she's the one that hadn't had a job since that box of candy fell on her head in 1959 at King Candy Company, of which Garrison did a great job of pulling all the documents for that. You know, she was engaged in a lawsuit with them for years and didn't work. Yet we have records of Marguerite Oswald working in New Orleans at Cox's department store, statements from John Pick that she worked there. We have the Retail Credit Association, the equivalent of like Experian back then, has her address in New Orleans. Or has her work address in New Orleans at Cox's in 61. This is fucking wild. This is wild. At this point, I don't see how anybody can deny that there were 2 Marguerites in 2 different places at the same time, numerous times. What do we have? 6, 7, 8 address anomalies? And then we have her working in New Orleans as per John Pick in 61, as per the documents in 61, while the known Marguerite allegedly didn't work after 59 because of an injury. The whole reason that Lee left the Marines in the first place? That injury. So, yeah. Wild shit. Wild shit. So after that, after this, I'm assuming this is the fake Marguerite. She has 3 additional addresses, all P.O. boxes. P.O. Box 305 in Boyd, Texas, September 7th, 1960. P.O. Box 473 in Vernon, Texas, November 61. and then P.O. Box 473 I'm sorry, that second one should have been 979. I'm sorry, I don't have that number in front of me, but it was, I made a mistake here. It's not 473. It's P.O. Box 473 in Caldwell, Texas in November of 61. Oh, forwarded from box. Oh, maybe it was 473 in both places. That's weird. But yeah, so she has additional addresses leading up to 1961 in Boyd, Vernon, and Caldwell, Texas. All the while, the fake Marguerite is living in Fort Worth the whole time. Right? So what is going on here? But yeah, I guess that's going to do it for today. I wrapped this up. This took longer than I expected. Tomorrow we'll get into the Marine stuff. The Marine stuff is long. It'll take us a couple days. But the Marine stuff, once you start to look at the Marine records, they're wild. Oswald was provably on a boat in Taiwan, the U.S. Skagit, where he got off and took pictures and stuff. And he called it Formosa when he was asked about it later on in life. At that exact same time, another Lee Oswald was back in Atsugi, where he was being treated for venereal disease and anal bleeding. So you can put two and two together on that one. But Oswald had fucking gonorrhea for like 2 months. No one ever talks about that. I have the records. I'll show them tomorrow. Actually, tomorrow I might do tomorrow's show on Rumble. I might do a video tomorrow to show this stuff. So, but that's gonna do it for me, guys. I don't even know what to say. This stuff has me speechless because it's hard for us to comprehend that the government could pull something like this off without getting busted, you know? So at least going through all the schools, right? So we have duplicate records of him in the early days. We have duplicate records of him while he's at Stripling versus Beauregard. We have duplicate records of him when he's in Biloxi, Mississippi, when he's in Jacksonville, Florida. I mean, we've got all kinds. I mean, the number of inconsistent and contradictory timings of Oswald's events are just overwhelming. And there's no other conclusion that anyone could possibly draw than that there were two Oswalds. So that's it, guys. I'm going to stop rambling. I'll see you guys tomorrow.